Shaitanir Rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And welcome to tonight's Instagram Live, which is all about gaining strength through the Quran and Quran journaling. We have all been watching the news, and when we're not watching the news, we're thinking about the news and praying for the plight of our brothers and sisters and the afflictions that they're facing. Now more than ever, we need to hold on to the Holy Quran, because the Holy Quran gives us context. It tells us that the life of this world is short and the life of the hereafter is everlasting. It tells us that people before us have been oppressed and what has happened to those oppressors. And it also tells us that people before us have been scared and frightened, and how they have managed to deal with that and their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in difficult times. So that's why we have dedicated tonight to thinking about these verses and healing through the Holy Quran. Just to also let you know that my Quran study journal is available from sunbehindthecloud.com. At the moment, if you buy one copy of my Quran study journal, £20 is donated to Lady Fatima Trust's Gaza Appeal. So this offer is on right now, so you can pick up your copy from our website, sunbehindthecloud.com. So without further ado, I would like to invite our esteemed guest this evening. She is a mother, a poet, and an avid Quran journaler. Some of you may have even seen her Quran journal and on her page at Something About Scripture. Really inspiring, mashallah. I am just going to check if she is here yet. There we go. Assalamu alaikum. It's so nice to see you. I know for a while we've been wanting to talk and catch up and speak about Quran journaling, so it's so nice to finally see you. Alhamdulillah.
Likewise, I have so much to say about Sun Behind the Clouds, so I'm so honored to be here. Thank you for having me.
You are too kind. You are too kind. Alhamdulillah. So I have been following your page at Something About Scripture and seeing the most beautiful, really inspiring Quran journaling that you're doing. Has this always been something that you've done, or is it a recent thing? What made you start Quran journaling?
So I've always been someone who likes to read, and I always used to annotate my books when I was younger. And I distinctly remember sitting probably 15 years ago in the Islamic Center of America in Dearborn, and it was during Shahr Ramadan, and the lecturer that they had brought had said something that always sat in my head. And he was saying that he had seen one time a lady, and she was holding her holy book, and it had tabs everywhere, and she had highlighted everything. And he's like, if only we were that possessive over the Quran. And that rang in my head for years before I ever acted upon it. But it was something that I've always, wanted to do. And I believe it was around 2017 when I really started to get into it. And Quran journaling wasn't really known. I did, this label. Even now, I don't really consider this. It's just me trying to study the Quran as much as I can. And so I, sat down and I'm like, I've never read the Quran, from cover to cover in a language that I can understand. And truly, if I need to, better myself as a Muslim, then at least I need to know what's in the holy book that we're following. So I started off that way, and I would just highlight the verses that would stick out to me, just like I would annotate my books. And it wasn't until 2021, I want to say, was when I really got into it, and I would start to annotate and delve into tafsir. And from then, so it's been almost 2 years of this being something that's consistent. And it's absolutely revolutionized my life. I look back and think, what was my life consisting of before delving so deep into the Quran? Because it's a night and day difference. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. You're right, though. Quran journaling is a kind of recent term that's been used, and for many people, it means different things.
Right.
For you, how would you say that you would usually interact with the Quran? How would you
your method of Quran journaling?
Right. So I have three different ways. Um, I have three, so I attached three different ribbons onto my Quran as bookmarks. So the first one is for keeping up with Arabic recitation. I think it's still very important to recite the Quran in the language that it was revealed in. So I never want to take away from the importance of that. I also have another one that marks my in-depth study, and I can get more into that as well. That's when I started doing in-depth study in 2021 around that
So do
time.
you use
And then my
like a
third,
tafsir?
I do
Mhm.
tafsir, yeah. And then
Okay.
my third ribbon is for everyday reading, following our 1 year Quran reading plan in English. And that's when I emphasize tadabbur al-Quran, right? So it's not about the quantity of how much you read of the Quran, but the quality, and to reflect
Mhm.
over it throughout the day. And I think tadabbur al-Quran is probably one of the most overlooked concepts that we have within our Islamic narrative, that through this page, I really wish to highlight, because it wasn't until into my adulthood that I even learned about this term tadabbur al-Quran.
Mhm.
Yeah, but so mostly I do tadabbur, which is like everyday reading. And
So
with tafsir, I have a specific method, but I didn't really, like it wasn't something I learned anywhere. It was just kind of my natural way of learning. And so that's how I
Mhm.
got into Quran journaling, because I'm not someone who can read something and then remember what I just read. And
Yeah.
I don't have a really sharp memory. I really don't. So that's why I got into all the highlighting and the sticky notes and the colors,
Yeah,
because
we do it for revision and work, whether that's uni or just normal work. We spend time highlighting and annotating our work so we can remember it. So why not with the Holy Quran?
that was exactly my thought process. I remember, when we were in school, you highlight, try to make your notes look as neat as possible so you can kind of visualize it. And I'm a very, very visual learner. So this is why this term Quran journaling is so new to me, because for me, this is just my natural method of learning.
Mm-hmm.
So if I will kind of search the meaning of a specific verse I came across, because I never understood the full meaning of it, and I want to kind of know more, or like the context, the historical context, I'll look up the tafsir of it, and I'll write down, kind of summarize the tafsir into little bubbles, notes, stickers, just because when I look at that, kind of look like the colors and the specific stickers I use, I can it takes me back to when I learned that verse, if that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense. It's very visual, and I'm a very visual learner. I struggled in school because
Mm-hmm.
we weren't very, like, nothing in school was very, like, colorful
Mm-hmm.
or anything like that. So when it comes to my Quran studies, it's probably the most important thing that we can be learning about. And so that's why we do all the sticky notes and the stickers and the highlighting.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's amazing how once you start doing Tadabbur al-Quran, that the verses speak to you in a way that maybe you might have read that verse before, but never in the same way. Have you noticed that?
Always, always, all the time. And it's, when I first read the Quran the first time, I used to think, wow, the Quran is just so repetitive. And I remember getting annoyed because I felt like it was a bit boring. But then I realized that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala repeats things because He's emphasizing them, because man, from all the way from, Prophet Adam until now, man is still the same. We still make the same mistakes no matter how many times God repeats
Mm-hmm.
it. And every time I read the Quran, it's, even though I would have previously highlighted that verse, I would be like, I still think it's as if I've read it for the first time and I don't remember reading it. Or if I do remember reading it, I don't remember tying it to a specific reflection or thought or lesson.
Yeah,
And so truly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us the best thing because it
yeah,
renews itself.
yeah,
I think, or growing up, you would always hear, like, from, Islamophobic comments, like, why don't we renew the Quran, kind of like a New Testament. But truly, when you read the Quran, no matter how many times you've read it, it's as if you're reading it for the first time all over again, because there's always something that you take away that you never previously took away from it.
yeah, yeah. I'm nodding lots because I really completely agree with you. And it's amazing how, as I mentioned in the beginning, we're going through very difficult times, and the same verses that you might have read before then have like a kind of new meaning. Or sometimes, like someone said to me that, they feel like every verse they're reading is about what's happening in Palestine, and and like every verse is about that. And it's amazing how depending on the situation, Allah gives you what you need at that time through the Holy Quran.
Definitely. And I, You know, I have the same experience every single time since this whole thing has happened. Every single verse I come across has to do with, you know, the believers being strong and having to be patient. And subhanAllah, actually, we try to hold monthly Quran sessions, either at my house or, you know, we have like a group of friends and we hold these sessions where we do Tadabbur al-Quran together as a group, you know, because there's power in community. And so this last week I was just preparing one of those sessions, and I really wanted something that had to do that was relevant to what's happening in Palestine and all of that. And subhanallah, really, like, God is so amazing because nothing is a coincidence. When you come across something in the Quran, it's not a coincidence. He's truly speaking to us directly. And I came across, I was actually at Surat Ghafir, and I was just reading a background summary, like the chapter summary, and from the study Quran by Hussein Nasir. And basically he had mentioned that Surat Ghafir is the first of 7 series of surahs. So Surat Ghafir and the 6 surahs after, they all start with Ha Mim, and then the second verse speaks about glorifying the Quran. But all 7 of those surahs are known as the Hawamim, or the brides, and that the overarching theme of all 7 of those surahs is to provide solace for the Muslim community in terms of, you know, at time of persecution, and to remind them that they will eventually be victorious if they are patient. And it truly came at the best time because I've been, you know, reading those chapters, and it's verse after verse. It, you know, goes through the punishment of the disbelievers in the hereafter, the reward of the believers in this world and in the hereafter, and the overarching theme being is that we have to be patient. And I think that is so relevant to everything that we're seeing.
You're completely right. Completely right. I agree with you. And you know what's so amazing? What I used to find difficult to grapple with is how the Quran is not set up like with a structure, in the sense that, of course, it has a structure, but it's not a thematic.
Right.
Like, it doesn't deal with one thing at a time. And, you know, before I used to find it, I still sometimes find it confusing that we've moved from one topic to another or a different time. But it's amazing how that same thing is what makes every single verse relevant at every single point. And Allah gives you that at that point, like you're opening the Quran and you're reading something and it's relevant to you. And not because you've opened up the section on oppression and you're reading that, but because every single verse is about multiple things all the time speaking to you. Which brings me on.
Yeah.
Which,
no, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, it brings me on to the verses that you chose to speak about today, because I'm really interested to hear what you're going to say, because I wouldn't have picked those verses, which is amazing, because that means that, like, you're thinking something, and it's really great to hear that. So I'm really excited. I think let's dive in if that's okay with you.
Yes, inshallah. So we are in. Let's do the first one. It's chapter 7.
Okay.
So Surat Al-A'raf, starting at verse 167 to 170.
Okay, perfect. If you have my Quran study journal, that is page 205.
Yes.
If you have one.
We have it right here. We never borrowed this Quran. It's such a blessing. Okay, so we said 167. Bismillah. So just a background, these verses that I'm about to mention speaks about the Jews, and it's very relevant to today. And it gives, you know, I think now with people being pro-Palestine and kind of bringing awareness to the genocide that's happening, there are a lot of claims of anti-Semitism. But this verse really shows Islam's view on us being, you know, it's not about your religion, it's about your action as a human being. And these verses really highlight that. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And when your Lord proclaimed that he would surely send against them being the Jews, until the day of resurrection, those who would inflict on them a terrible punishment. Indeed, your Lord is swift in retribution, and indeed he is all forgiving, all merciful. We dispersed them into communities around the earth. Some of them were righteous, and some of them otherwise. And we tested them with good and bad times so that they may come back. Then they were succeeded by an evil posterity, which inherited the book. They grab the transitory gains of this lower world and say it will be forgiven. And if similar transitory gains were to come their way, they would grab them too. Was not the covenant of the book taken with them that they shall not attribute anything to Allah except the truth? They have studied what is in it and know that the abode of the hereafter is better for those who are God-weary. Do you not exercise your reason? And so I picked this specific verse because I was looking through the tafsir. And if we go back to the verse where he says, يَأْخُذُونَ عَرَضَ هَذَا الْأَدْنَى, they grab the transitory gains of this lower world. Allama Tabatabai in Tafsir al-Mizan has a very beautiful tafsir about this. And he kind of goes back to the Arabic verbiage that is used, which is عَرَضَ هَذَا الْأَدْنَى. And he says that adna is basically masculine, and it's very uncommon to use that word. Usually we say dunya, which is the feminine version of that word. And so by using the masculine version, adna, he's basically saying, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically saying that this world is not even worthy of notice because it doesn't have like a gender. Usually when they use adna, it's as if you don't know what it is because it has no worth. And I thought that was so important because truly, what are we striving after if you're the oppressor or if you're a believer? And we're always worried about this world. And we're always, we get so heartbroken when we lose something in this world. But then we look at the Palestinians now, and I've seen a particular phrase that's been used when it comes to addressing the Palestinians, and it's what is their faith? And what type of faith do they have? Where some of them are so indifferent to losing their children right in front of their eyes. And truly, I feel like the Palestinian people have considered this dunya as adna, just like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions it in this verse, that it's nothing. It doesn't even, it doesn't need a specific verb, to have importance. So I thought that was very beautiful.
That's the amazing thing about the Quran, is that it puts it into context. Like at the moment, we're seeing all these terrible things happening, and we think the winners look like the people who have more, but in the context of the Quran, this is not the case.
Right. And I think it's very easy to kind of be consumed by everything that we're seeing because it's unnatural. It's unnatural for us to see women and children in their most vulnerable moments. Gory images, heartbreaking images, and the thing is that we have to see these, unfortunately, so the truth comes out about what's truly happening. But really, I kind of imagine myself in their shoes, and like, would I really want my most vulnerable moment to be plastered everywhere? And I think we become all consumed. I think we were speaking in our Quran reflections yesterday, saying how we feel like this depression has come over us and we can't think about anything else. And there has been moments where I see people losing hope, because what is happening is so unfathomable, but we can't lose hope. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is testing us, not just the people of Palestine, but also us. I think we are just in that same wavelength of being tested, and how much we hold onto the hope, and our most awaited hope being Imam al-Mahdi.
Yeah, they completely. And then you're right. It is kind of this when people talk about vicarious trauma, because people are watching it and feeling it as if it's them, or as if they're going through the situation, but also feeling bad about feeling bad because we're not going through that, and we have to go to work and we have to put food on the table and all these live a sort of normal life at the same time, which is very, very difficult, knowing what's happening not so far away from us to people that we feel connected with. So yeah, I completely agree with you, and that's why connecting to the Quran at this time is so important. Even short phrases like obviously we all know that famous Quranic phrase, "La yukallifu Allahu nafsan illa wus'aha." And I think to myself, whoa, the Palestinians must have such great faith to be able to carry this burden in a way that, with grace. So may Allah grant them more tawfiq and help them, inshallah. Yeah. And for us, learning that lesson of seeing the dunya as something insignificant is a really important one for us to learn. Absolutely.
Should we move on to the next verse?
Yeah, please.
So the next verse is actually in Surat A'raf, which is chapter 26. And I'll be reading verses 154 through 157. So if you're following the Quran journal, it's page 448.
Yes, 148. And if anyone would like to ask any questions or add to the discussion, please feel free to write something in the comment section and we'll read it out, inshallah. Yes.
154. And this, for context, is speaking about the people of Thamud. He says, so they would say, you are just a human being like us, so bring us a sign should you be truthful. He said, this is a she-camel. She shall drink, and you shall drink on known days. Do not cause her any harm, for then you shall be seized by the punishment of a terrible day. But they hamstrung her, whereupon they became regretful. So the punishment seized them. And upon looking at the tafsir, actually, I believe it was in Tafsir al-Mizan, he mentions in Nahj al-Balagha, in Sermon 201, Imam Ali alayhi salam actually speaks about the people of Thamud. And what he says is so profound and so unbelievably, it's as if Imam Ali is here with us now and he's speaking about the times. He says, O people, certainly what gathers people together in categories is their agreement to good or bad and their disagreement. For only one individual killed the camel of Thamud, but Allah held all of them in punishment, because all of them joined him by their consenting to it. And so, I think I've heard a lot about, us and how we shouldn't. Do we really have to speak about what's happening in Palestine? Do we really have to speak out? And subhanAllah, like Imam Ali says it so clearly, like the people of Thamud, though it was only one person who hamstrung the she-camel, they all got punished because they were all okay with it. They were all passive about it. And so for me, I think it's now more than ever, we really need to be vocal about our stance, because it's genocide. It's genocide just as they slaughtered the family of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. I don't believe that it's any different now, in the sense that we're seeing a lot of parallels. They've cut off the water, they've cut off the food source, they're targeting women and children.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's the parallel is right there in front of us. Yeah. And I think many times, I'm guilty of this, is that we judge the people at that time. Yeah. Because history makes everything black and white to us, and we say, if only we were there, we would have supported you, Imam Hussein. But and we judge the people of Kufa as being, two-faced, or not being brave enough, being cowardly, and all of these types of things. But now it's us, and we are watching a situation unfold, and the test is for us just as much as how we react to that situation, and maybe become humbled by history as well. That we're not necessarily better than the people that came before us.
Not at all. We're still the same. Hence, in the beginning of this live, I said that the Quran is extremely repetitive, and truly it's because we don't learn. Like, this is not the first time genocide at this large of a scale has happened. And so the people, we're also held accountable then, just like we will be held accountable now about our silence and our passiveness. We're really the same people. We're just living in different times, but we're going through the same thing, going through the same tests, and we will be held accountable for how we act.
And for how we act. And recognizing those patterns of behavior is something that the Quran does really well.
Yeah.
And really calls us out for those things that what humanity has done in the past, and how. And even what's a scary thing is, we read those verses of Quran like ظَهَرَ الْفَسَادُ فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ, that the corruption will be filled in the land and the sea because of what man has done, what humanity has done with their own hands. And that is the time when the Imam, inshallah, will reappear. And I feel like there's corruption upon corruption, dhulm upon dhulm, in oppression upon oppression in the world, And I feel like at the moment, of course, the spotlight is on what's happening in Gaza. And of course, our attention is there, but there are still so many other places in the world where Muslims are being oppressed, where people in general are being oppressed, and that is not stopping whilst this is going on, whilst everyone's attention is here. So, they all need our prayers, and we're just the same patterns of behavior continue.
You know how you're mentioning that verse about, the corruption will be filled in the
Mhm.
seas and in the land. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked the angels to prostrate to
Yeah,
Adam, and they said,
yeah.
your Lord said to the angels, indeed, I am going to get it. And they said, um, what did they say?
أتجعل فيها
Right. قالوا أتجعل فيها ما يفسد فيها ويسفك الدماء ونحن نسبح بحمدك ونقدس لك. And actually, I know this wasn't one of the verses that we were going to
yeah,
go through, but if you look at the tafsir, he kind of explains how Allah never denied what they said.
yeah.
He didn't say, no, man will not shed blood. He said, indeed, I know what you do not know. So he did not deny
That
that
still sends
man will
shivers down
indeed
me,
shed
you know.
blood. Huh?
I said that verse still sends shivers down me
Chills,
every time.
really.
Chills.
It's like the foreshadowing of the bigger movie. In the beginning of the
Exactly.
movie, there's a huge foreshadow.
Yeah. I know what you don't know, and that just that one line, keeping that in our minds. At those times where people might feel helpless, or in distress so much about what's happening, and that's obviously understandable. And why shouldn't we feel the distress? Of course, but with the helplessness, we have to remember that Allah is aware. Um, and he can see what's happening, and he already knew before what was going to happen. And even there's a verse, I can't remember which surah, but that everything is written in that sense. But then it's still hard, but then having that awareness that Allah is here, that he can see everything and he knows everything, is something that is a big solace as well.
I think that's a great point as to why we should be holding so tightly onto the Quran, because listen, we're being fed so much propaganda, and so when you read the Quran, it's almost as if it's like a positive affirmation, where when you're reading it, it really instills that belief in you that the patient will be rewarded. This is not just something that is something, it's easy to sit there and hold your Quran and be like, look what God created and this is so beautiful. It's a very like face value faith, but it's not. Islam is not that way. He will test us. I believe there's a verse that says, do you think you will not be tested?
Mm.
You can just claim faith, but of course you're going to be tested, because it's easy to claim faith. That's the easiest part of having faith, is to say that I believe. But without being tested, we don't truly believe, and the Muslims will be prosecuted. Otherwise, why would Allah put 7 surahs that aims, to help soothe them in times of persecution? Because that is part of being a Muslim. We are going to be prosecuted, and unfortunately, we will face hardship. But this is, the life, the dunya, the adna.
Exactly. And keeping that in the forefront of our minds, and having that sort of Quranic worldview puts everything into context, like those little pieces of the jigsaw that just don't make sense unless you seeing it all as one. And when you see it in the context of this life being short and the hereafter being, forever and everlasting, and you think that these Palestinians will enter heaven in droves, we will be standing there having to answer for our, selves and what we have done. So yeah, definitely puts everything into context a lot. Yes.
So the third verse, or passage, is in chapter 40, which is Surat Ghafir, verses 26 through 29.
That's page 563, yeah?
Yes, ahsant, yes. I said verse 26. Yeah, so, and this is basically about Pharaoh trying to tell the people that he wants to kill Moses and what happens after that. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And Pharaoh said, let me slay Moses and let him invoke his Lord. Indeed, I fear that he will change your religion or bring forth corruption in our land. And here I really want to emphasize Pharaoh's point of view in all of this. He's trying to make himself seem as if he cares for the well-being of his people, when truly he doesn't. And so we see a lot of that now, right? Where everything is blamed on the opposing, the opposing army is hiding in these hospitals and churches, and that's why we're basically blowing everyone up to oblivion, because I care for you. We have to stop the terror that's happening. We're hearing the same propaganda. It's not anything new. And then Moses says, I seek the protection of my Lord and your Lord. from every arrogant one who does not believe in the day of reckoning. Instead, a man of faith from Pharaoh's clan who concealed his faith. So he had concealed his faith up until that moment where he realized it was dire for him to speak up about his faith because Moses' life was on the line. And he says, will you kill a man for saying, my Lord is Allah, while he has already brought you manifest proofs from your Lord? Should he be lying, his falsehood will be his own detriment. But if he is truthful, there shall visit you some of what he promises you. Indeed, Allah does not guide someone who is a transgressor and liar. O my people, today sovereignty belongs to you, and you are dominant in the land. But who will save us from Allah's punishment should it overtake us? And just a note that Allama Tabatabai makes in Tafsir al-Mizan is the verbiage of Mu'min Ali Fir'aun, which is the man who's speaking. He says, who will save us from the punishment, from Allah's punishment should it overtake us? So he's speaking in plural form, including himself in the terminology to show how sincere he truly is. He cares about them just as much as he cares about himself. And then when we move on to verse 29, Pharaoh said, I just point out to you what I see to be advisable for you, and I guide you only to the way of rectitude. And you see, just from the way that they speak, you can see the level of arrogance and sincerity that one has and one doesn't. And so Pharaoh is like one of the earliest forms of propaganda, who loves propaganda, who loves to present himself as if he is the innocent one and he's only doing what's best for you. And this is a form of manipulation. And so we're seeing it in the Quran that was revealed 1400 years ago, and we're seeing it now on our TVs. It's the same narrative, and it's played over and over and over again. And so I think now is time to be like Mu'min Ali Fir'aun, who stands up, you know, in a very metaphorical way for the life of Prophet Moses, peace and blessings be upon him.
That's really beautiful. It's amazing how it's the exact same thing, and the propaganda that Pharaoh did is this, of course. And then I think at some points he even mentioned, you know, Prophet Musa wants to take you out of this land, and all of this things that he never actually said, but were used to scare people into submitting to Pharaoh. And that scare tactic is what we can see in front of us.
Fear-mongering.
Exactly, that fear-mongering, and changing the narrative into a certain lens where then it's difficult to sometimes to navigate that. Especially if, like, okay, we, you know, obviously come from a certain context and a certain bias, but for people who have not been you know, brought up that way, maybe it's even more difficult to discern truth from propaganda.
Definitely. And I think really, truly, when the lines are so blurred, and when, you know, this fitna that is coming from every corner, you know, it's not just from our news outlets, it's from people around us, it's from our entire society, unfortunately, to keep that ground, to know what righteousness is, we need to really hold tight to the Quran. Because you know when you're building like an IKEA piece of furniture and furniture from IKEA, how many times do you refer back to the pamphlet just in case that you don't put a piece wrong or in the wrong place, because trying to take the dowel out will be close to impossible. So you review that manual 1,000 times. And so not just in this time when it's difficult to be a Muslim, but throughout our entire lives, we should be holding on to the Quran like our life depends on it, because it does. It really, truly does. And now I think we're seeing the reality of that. How when we don't know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deems as truth, the lines of truth become to be blurred, and the lines of what is right and what is false are also very blurred.
Yeah, and you're right about holding on to the Quran in all times, because, you know, one of the fruits of that is being patient in times of difficulty, is because you have kind of already understood the message of the Quran, or you know, that you've already kind of inculcated that into your heart, so that when the test comes, you're kind of ready for it. You don't have to learn it from scratch, and you're ready. And we've seen, I don't know, I've seen so many videos from Palestine, but you know, some of them where people are holding on to verses of the Quran, or have you seen those? Yeah. And they're so awe-inspiring. You know, I think there was one of a lady who had been memorizing the Quran, and she was saying how helpful it had been for her to undergo that study of the Quran before the, you know, invasion. So definitely. I can see it's helping them. Inshallah, it helps us too.
I think the reason why they have such strong faith in such turmoil is because they really internalize the Quran, not only in just memorization, but acting upon it, right? Because the Quran, we need to act upon what we know, right?
Mm.
So there was a quote I read years ago. It says, the scholar who knows so much is and doesn't act upon what he knows is not any better than the common layman. But someone who's not a scholar but acts upon the little that he knows is better than any scholar. And so truly it comes back to action. Like right now, we might look at the Quran and be like, wow, it's so nice. It has tabs and it's colored and it looks like it's a very well read Quran. And to be quite honest, reading the Quran is the easiest part about, this Quran journaling and this journey with the Quran, but acting on it, acting upon it,
Mm.
being patient in this time. We were actually reflecting over Surat Fusilat yesterday, and one of the verses that was mentioned was how we should speak to those who disbelieve in such a way, in such a kind way. Actually, let me read it so I don't, change the meaning of their verse. It says, "Oh, good and evil conduct are not equal. Repel evil with what is best. If you do so, he between whom you has enmity will then be as though he were a sympathetic friend." So, like when you treat someone with such akhlaq, because that is essentially what our religion is. Our religion is a religion of akhlaq. And you uphold that akhlaq even though the person is being rude to you or calling you names or, calling you a terrorist or whatever it is. And you're still being nice to him and upholding the akhlaq, just like the imams and the Ahlul Bayt alayhim did. They will eventually see you as someone who's a sympathetic friend, someone who is their friend, because even though you had so many chances to be rude to them and to degrade them and call them names you didn't, and you upheld that patience that it takes to be kind to someone, even though you might be emotionally triggered. And I think, when we're looking at these interviews right now about, when it's like like someone from Palestine and then like Zionists, I think there's a lot of name calling going back and forth, and really that doesn't get us anywhere. And I think the Quran is very clear about how we should be having these conversations, even though it is very emotionally hard to do so. Because I think from all of the verses in the Quran, I think this is probably one of the hardest to actually practice. Because,
Mm.
speaking about women and children being murdered, it's just, how much patience can you possibly have? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it very clear.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see this in the life of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam and how they dealt with people um, at times of war and also in times of peace, that when they were, unkind to them, or, even when we see them in battle, how in the Battle of Siffin, when Muawiyah took the water from Imam Ali's army and banned them from being able to access water. And then Imam Ali's army overtook them. Malik Ashtar went and he overtook them. And they said, okay, what's the order? Shall we now bar them from being able to access the water? And he said, no.
Right.
He said, no, because that's not our way, and we have to always remember that no matter how angry we feel or how, emotionally heightened the situation becomes, that our akhlaq is paramount. And without that, we've already lost.
Right. And akhlaq doesn't come overnight, right? So it's something that we have to work on. Just like how right now when the Palestinians are being faced with such a test, they had that Quran within them. They always relied on the Quran
Mm.
before this ever happened, right? So I think it's the same thing. And also in that battle with Imam Ali alayhi salam, where one of the soldiers spit at him right before he was about to swing his
In
sword, and
Khandaq,
he
yeah.
thought, and
Mm.
because he didn't want to, end it just because of anger, but for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And also we see in the life of the Prophet Muhammad salawatullahi alayhi wa alayhi, they used to throw trash at him, feces, and he was still known even amongst the polytheists and the disbelievers to be someone who was truthful and kind
Mhm.
and who had akhlaq. I read one time that they would keep their treasures, like their gold and their money, with him because they trusted him so much
Yeah.
that he would not steal it. And so look at the level of akhlaq and how hard that is to actually attain. But truly, I think
Mhm.
before, right now as Muslims, I'm assuming a lot of our audience are Muslims, and it's about us reading the Quran. But I think something that's very important to know is that non-Muslims realistically will not read the Quran. They'll read us as Muslims. And I know right now it's very, it's a very emotional time. And I think how we respond to this will kind of showcase a lot of our Muslim values and Islamic values or not. So I think
Yeah.
that's the test that we really need to be focusing on for someone who's not in Palestine and not going through that battle, but we're going through this battle, and that our akhlaq has to be up to par. And that's a huge burden to carry.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's our test, how we deal with this situation, how we manage to stand up against oppression, keeping our akhlaq, making sure that we don't conflate issues of the past and be very sincere in our actions, inshallah. I really pray that we can, make that difference and follow that example that we have seen from the Holy Quran of people who have, managed to stay steadfast. We all the time, our hearts are there. We're remembering of the people in Palestine and praying for them and praying for their safety and for their strength in these very, very difficult days. And I pray that the end is soon,
Inshallah.
and that we are all here at the return of the 12th Imam, and that we can hold on to the Quran and be his true followers, inshallah. Inshallah. Sister Abir, I am so thankful to you for coming on,
Thank you for
for
having
taking the
me.
time.
Honestly, the honor was all mine.
No, taking the time to go through these verses and sharing your experiences with us. It's really an honor. Thank you so much, and I pray for your continued tawfiq, inshallah.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having this platform. And, the one thing, I used to dream of a Quran journal. And, subhanAllah, this was like an answered prayer. So thank you. And may Allah reward you for all the efforts that you put into these publications for not only children, but for adults as well. I think we have so many children's books, and it's great to see adults being catered to as well, because, there's a huge gap in the field, and you guys are doing such an amazing job, mashallah.
Thank you, thank you. Please remember us in your du'as, and thank you so much for today. And I don't think anybody asked a single question, so you
No, I
must
think
have been
someone
super.
did ask
Oh,
a
did they?
question about the
Well, I
last
didn't
verse
see.
that I had mentioned. That was in Surat Fusilat, which is chapter 41, and it was verse 34, the last verse that I had mentioned about disbelievers seeing us like sympathetic friends. I had forgot to mention the chapter.
Oh, perfect. I'm glad you saw that because I did not see that. Just check. There's no other questions that I might have missed. I think that was it. Oh, hang on. Oh, here. Can you give us a few tips for someone who is considering starting Quran journaling?
Yeah.
Now, let's try and do that last thing. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I think sometimes when we think about the Quran, we get overly intimidated, and we think that we need to have all of these supplies and tools, and we want to delve into tafsir, and we get so overwhelmed because there are so many resources out there. The Quran is simple. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't reveal it for the scholar or for the learned person. He revealed it for all of mankind. For someone who has no education to someone who has a PhD. It's very comprehensible. It's very easy to understand, and don't overcomplicate it. If you are someone who learns quickly, you don't need to highlight and color and do all of those things. If that seems like a task or a chore, when I first started, I didn't delve into tafsir for a good 2 or 3 years, actually. I was just focusing on reading the Quran from cover to cover in a language that I could understand. And I would highlight the verses that would stick out to me. I would write question marks over the verses that I had questions about, and I would tab them. So when I would go to the mosque or when I had time, I would be able to research it later on. But don't overthink it. Don't feel like you have to have certain books, or you have to have certain pens, or you have to have certain things. All you have to have is the Quran. That's it. It's really just that simple. And so before you delve into tafsir, before you delve into any of that, just read the Quran from cover to cover at least once before you start worrying about tafsir. And I think something that I often see in the Quran journaling community that may work for some people, but personally doesn't work for me, is where they try to do tafsir for the entire chapter. Like they'll go and like get a notebook and they'll write the tafsir for every single verse. Realistically, are you gonna going to remember anything that you wrote? Probably not. So I really recommend, and something that's worked for me is to just do tafsir over the verses you have questions about, or something that you want to know more details about, like context or historical references. So for example, like Thamud. Okay, so some verses will reference Thamud, but maybe you don't know what the story of Thamud is. So maybe go and look up what the story of Thamud is, and we had covered it. It was about the she-camel, and read more about that. So I think just kind of go, let your intuition lead you. So where you're naturally curious, that's where you should research and build from that. I think when we see like Qur'ans that are filled with notes or something, we think, oh, how can I possibly do that in one day? It's not, it won't take a day. It's about consistency, reading the Qur'an, and ultimately the Qur'an should be a means to growing closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And everything else is just, an instrument to help us get there, So if you're someone like me who needs to color code in order to remember, then I highly encourage doing that. And if you're someone who can remember what you read without doing that, I really think that you're God's chosen person.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice. Great advice. And just take it, so don't put any pressure on yourself.
Right.
Just take it as it comes. Sometimes you see these beautiful journals and you think, oh, I wish I could, I'm going to spend the whole night making one of those. But that's not how it works. You have to,
Right.
try and be
It's not about the
consistent.
aesthetic. I know, like in the world of social media, everything is about being aesthetically
That's why
pleasing or
I never
looking
show
nice
anyone
and
my
things.
Quran. It's a mess. Yeah, my tabs are not the same size or even from the same brand, and they're like a mix and match. And
But
yeah,
it works.
definitely,
It works, and we're still able to build that relationship with the Quran.
alhamdulillah. And also, taking away that worry that, oh, can I write on it, in it? Can I highlight it? Can I, what if it's messy? What if I make a mistake? These are all things just you can just feel.
I think something that really sparked my interest was I really forget, I can't source where I read this, but I remember seeing photos and reading somewhere, some in the wide internet, about the early scholars of Islam actually would annotate their Qurans as they were learning the tafsir. And so there's images. I will try to look them up and try to find them of like small writing in between the lines of the Quran. This is a practice that's been, happening within our history. It's not anything new. Quran journaling maybe is just a fancy term for it,
Yeah,
but annotating your Quran, yeah, has been going on for years, all the way to the early scholars of Islam.
yeah, just interacting with it, and it being a relationship rather than something that is kept on the shelf or something like that. That the Quran is something that you interact with, and it's also much more personal, because what you feel you can also write and journal about, which can be quite a cathartic experience actually, to write how you feel when you read a verse, and then reading back, sometimes you can't believe what you wrote at that time. So that's amazing. I could talk to you all day, I'm sure,
Likewise.
about this, and we could spend a lot longer. But I know I'm aware of the time, and thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming here and giving your time. And
Thank you.
thank you also to everyone who was watching. I know there are some who would like to watch later, so I'm going to try my best to save this on my page, inshallah. But for now, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.